My name is Jon Parker. I'm Director for Wales with the Food Farming and Countryside Commission. You might wonder why there's a Welsh bloke who's come over the water. There's a bit of a story behind that in this session, because 5 years ago, Welsh Government launched a similar consultation to the NAP consultation, and lucky me, I ended up in the middle of it, working with industry, because the Minister put forward quite an interesting proposition at that time for industry to come up with a solution that was as good as or better than regulating. And along with processing sector, we tried our best to come up with a solution, came up with a solid solution, and unfortunately, for various reasons, the Minister regulated, and we are in the same position we are now with the MVZ regulation in Wales. But there are various solutions to that. We've had a review of the regulation, and alternative measures are still very much on the table. So with that in mind, and the topic of this session today, very conscious that our watercourses and our water bodies have become a focal point, almost a poster child for river pollution in all its forms and from all its vectors across the UK. We've got our issues in the Wye in Wales, as well as you have with Loch Ness. Amongst this, agriculture has a part to play in solutions, in finding finding pathways to ensuring that our rivers and land are healthy. And with that in mind, land use, how we use our land, has never been more in focus. And I want to just say one final thing before I move on to our excellent panelists, who I'll introduce in a second. Last year, Minister Muir made a comment that stuck with me and said, never in most recent times have we asked farmers to do as much, and our expectations of what land will do for us at this present time. And from my perspective, and working with Welsh Government and Welsh Government ministers, that was really pleasing to hear, because we don't hear that concession being made very often. So on that note, we'll take us into the session, and I'll make some brief introductions to our panel. We have Andrew Sincock with Agriton, Bronagh Dempster, who's with us from Leprino Foods, Mark Horton from Ballinderry Rivers Trust. Yes. Got that right? Excellent. And Marie Kirby from Harper University. So the format of the session, we're just going to start off with a broad context and contextualize the issues that we have. And Mark and Bronagh are going to help us out with that. Then we're going to have some discussion around the solutions. There are many props on stage that I'm trying desperately not to fall over at the moment. So we'll run through the solutions. And then have a discussion around the more strategic context of where we are, and we'll open it up to yourselves for questions towards the end. So, if I can start with yourselves, Mark and Bronagh.
Okay, thank you everybody for coming into the talk. I just wanted to take a moment before we get started on this session to remember someone who's not with us today, who would have loved to have been here. Last year, Alan Keyes was here and spoke at this event. Many of you will have heard of him or know about him and the work that he had done over the years with Ballinderry Rivers Trust, and lately had really pushed the idea of comfrey as a solution to water pollution on farms. And here's a pot of comfrey sitting in front of me, which I'll talk about in a little while. But I just wanted to take a moment to remember Alan, who I knew from when I started my career here in Northern Ireland, which was really the start of my career, full stop. And he taught me everything that I know. He influenced the way in which I work and speak with landowners, and really just taught me that we need to listen to each other, that we all have a role to play in protecting our environment, in making sure that we can have sustainable agriculture into the future, and that those things work hand in hand. So Alan was to be here today, and unfortunately passed away I think it's a month and a half maybe now, time's flying by. So I just wanted to remember him and the great work that he's done throughout his entire life, and the work that we'll continue to do in his memory. So I'm going to ask Bronagh maybe to start off by setting some of the context of what we'll be talking about today.
Thank you. Falls to me, as the only one with a native accent, perhaps, to give some context to this debate. I recognise there's a few people in this room that I know are from elsewhere, so if the rest of you will just humour me for a few minutes here while we give that some context. So for anyone who's travelled far, welcome to Northern Ireland, and also for anyone who's not familiar with our agricultural industry, you're very welcome. I didn't grow up in an agricultural family either, and this industry has given me a great career and a great base of friends, so you'll find yourself very welcome here. So typically, Northern Ireland has been an area of agricultural intensification. Like many, many factors of our society, we can look back to our past, to this, a complex past, a political past, but in this case, one of the contributing factors being land fragmentation. An issue particularly unique and pertinent to Northern Ireland over perhaps the rest of the UK. So historical plantation and land acts have had a lasting effect here in Northern Ireland. I look at the road that I grew up on, for example, and every 300 or 400 yards, there's people who own 8 acres, there's people who own 10 acres, and there's people who own 12 acres. This is a historical fact that grew out from sort of tenancy agreements and buying land off landlords then as well. As a result, our agricultural land base has always been extremely fragmented. As farms have grown bigger, the likes of the Green Revolution, land has not largely come in adjoining blocks, but instead has come in smatterings here, there, and everywhere. This, in turn, has had some contribution to the higher proportion of housed livestock that we have in this country, given that managing the likes of dairy herds is very difficult if you have them based along 10 fields and trying to bring them in for milking. Land fragmentation could also be a further contributing factor to the large pig and poultry industries we have here, as farmers have sought to increase, and rightly so, their agricultural output across a smaller land base to give themselves a wage, feed their family, and ensure the future of the farm. This fragmentation, paired with headage payments and land-based payments we have received in the past, makes the situation here unique to that counterparts perhaps in the south and also east of here as well. So clearly, with housed livestock comes manure, a fantastic source of organic fertiliser, but like most good things, must be used responsibly. More recently, the Consultation on the revised NAP programme has never seen an uproar like never before. Slurry and livestock manures have never been so hotly debated, which leaves us to a particularly relevant topic today then. But today's panel is not about whataboutery or finger pointing, it's about positivity and finding solutions. We know the industry does have a surplus P balance, that is a fact, so let's make sure that any of that P and indeed that nitrogen does not find its way into the waterways.
Fantastic. Mark, do you want to add anything onto that in terms of context?
Well, I think you did a great job there, Bronagh. I suppose, I've had to learn over the years. I'm not from a farming background, so I've had to learn over the years the challenges that farmers face. My background is in environmental management, and bringing those two things together, I think, has been a real life lesson in that need to listen to each other for solutions. And we've come to a point, I think, in Northern Ireland where we literally need to make a peace agreement with the environment. We've done it before, we can do it again, but we need to take this opportunity now. The debate is live, as it is, to come to some agreement on how we can work for win-win solutions. And having discussed what's happening in other parts of the UK, I actually feel that we're in a better position than most other places in order to do this. So let's stay positive about it.
So having set the context, then let's look at some of the solutions. And we'll start with Andrew, and we'll come on to Marie. So Andrew, do you want to give us a talk about what you've been up to?
Yeah, brilliant. So I have been asked to talk today because I'm working with a number of people in the UK as part of an Innovate UK trial and research project looking at the way in which we can manage our slurries. We took quite a holistic approach and that sort of sits quite well with me, and we sort of took a step back and looked at the problem, and we've decided that slurry in itself is an unnatural product. And how can we best manage that moving forward? What can we do? And the solution that we sort of came up with was to split or to separate the slurry. So we deal with the liquid and the solid portions separately. There's a Dutch guy that we sort of consulted and worked with that said if poo and pee were supposed to be mixed together, they'd come out the same hole. The fact that they don't makes it a particularly shitty product to deal with. So by separating them, we've got two products that we can then process, and we've got options in ways in which we can do so. So when it comes to the solid portion of the slurry, we're looking at processing that through a bokashi system, so fermenting the organic matter to retain the nutrients to then ultimately put back into the soil. With the liquid portion, we're looking to run that through a biochar filter and then through reed beds or a willow bed system to create what we're calling grey water, which we can then reuse to help irrigate the farm during the increasingly dry periods that we're seeing on our side of the water. I think it's still remarkably green here. So it's a sort of two-part approach to processing the slurry, and we're hoping that it's going to prove successful. We won't know until we try it, obviously. We're into what will now be the end of year one. The slurry has been separated. The processes involved in getting the raw materials pre-processing has been relatively simple and easily. It's done and very easily replicated across a number of farms. So the early stages are that everybody should relatively easily be able to achieve the sort of processing required to then take it to the next step, which will be the bokashi and the reed bed and the biochar filters. I think I'll leave it there for a second.
Excellent, thank you. Marie, can you run us through your work, please?
So about 4 years ago at Harper Adams University, we wanted to try and find on-farm, scalable, relatively straightforward technology solutions to try and deal with slurry. So at the time in England, we were talking about the farming rules for water and restricting the amount of phosphorus as well as the amount of nitrogen we're doing. And we'd already been doing at lab scale some work with the digestion industry to recover this phosphorus. So apologies for those at the back that might not be able to see, but we do have a stand in the horticulture. You could see these in more detail, but if we look at the volume of slurry we produce, we take that slurry and we put it through a piece of technology that doses ions into the slurry and groups together with the phosphorus. The phosphorus becomes heavier and falls out of solution. So we have a rich phosphorus nitrogen product, which at the moment could be a liquid or it could be a solid. But for many livestock farmers, we would expect them to want to sell that product off of farm to an arable farmer to offset their need for artificial fertilizer. The remaining product that comes out of the technology is then a low phosphorus, high nitrogen liquid. And we can get around 98% recovery of phosphorus in total from this technology. But from some of the work we've been doing with stakeholders, they wanted some of that phosphate to move through into our liquid slurry proportion that we would put onto farm. So we just make the system a little bit less efficient effectively. And we generate a low P liquid nitrogen product. So for many farmers, that would allow them to spread slurry as they currently do without oversupplying phosphorus. Then the farmers threw us a different challenge. They said, that's great. We're reducing our slurry volume for about 30%, 40%. But what we would really like to do is recover water. So we've been working with the Environment Agency to take that liquid nitrogen product, remove a further 80% of the water in that product, to make a very concentrated liquid nitrogen. Still at late R&D stage, but we're hoping this is going to be sprayable, or you can put it on with a tank depending on what your farming solution is. So then we would reduce the volume of slurry to be stored. You could then make more precision fertilizer nutrients to apply for crop and soil need, and hopefully will reduce the greenhouse emissions associated with storage and application. And that's part of some of the research work that we're doing at the moment at Harper Adams. We're currently looking at cattle, but it could be applied to pig, digestions, and we would like to start moving into the poultry area, but that's slightly further away for us.
Great. Thank you, Marie. So moving back to Mark, then Mark, can you run through some of the work that the Rivers Trust has been doing in Northern Ireland here?
Yeah, thank you very much. So we've been working, as I said earlier on, directly with farmers on their farms, recognizing that every single farm is different, that not one solution is going to work for everyone. But what we do see is that our rainfall patterns are changing. Farmers have increasing amounts of water getting into their slurry tanks from their yards, from their roofs, for example. And when they put slurry out on the field, it's quite possible they could get caught out with a big heavy shower of rain as we get these more frequent, intense downpours, particularly during the summer. So we're looking for ways to work with landowners to reduce the possibility that that slurry might actually get to a watercourse, be that stream or a river. So we're looking to provide non-regulatory advice to farmers, because very often when we walk the farm with people, they say, look, I know what the problem is here, I know what the challenge is, I just don't know how to fix it. But they also don't know who to go to ask for help. Because when you ask for help, you're basically putting your head above the parapet saying, I have a problem, and there's a risk that someone might come and hit you with a big stick or a big fine. So as a charity, we're saying we don't come with that big stick. We're here to help you out, not catch you out. We walk the entire farm and identify what we can do on the farm to control the flow of water, reduce the risk of dirty water or slurry getting to the river. And we're creating buffer zones along rivers. Immediately when I say buffer zones, people think of a fence and a strip of land between the fence and the river that they can't farm anymore. What we're doing is looking at what we might think of as smart buffers. So concentrating an area of vegetation, be that trees or shrubs or grasses, in the places where the water runs off the field into the river, and building that into the farm system so it's easy to continue to use the fields the way they were intended to be used. But these buffers, smart buffers, prevent the sediment, the nutrient, dirty water washing off the land and the fields into the rivers. So using nature, essentially, to protect water. But also, up in the farmyards where you have lots of grey water that might otherwise have to be collected in tanks or may actually get down a pipe or a drain straight to the river, we're looking to use other nature-based solutions to clean that water and capture the nutrient before it would get to a watercourse. And that's where the likes of these plants, such as comfrey, for example, come into play. So if we gather the dirty water to one point in the yard and send it through a series of channels, which we're calling swales, that are dug into an area of a field, they can be backfilled, a bit like a shore or a drain, and then comfrey planted on top of that. And this comfrey plant, it's growing in our countryside anyway, all over the place, will grow the height of a wheelie bin, and the roots will go down maybe the depth of 2 wheelie bins. And it's really good at pulling up the nutrient out of the water. That nutrient is going into the leaves of these plants, which you can then mow over with your grass and take that leaf in the grass back into your silage, and it can be fed back to your cattle again. Meanwhile, the water, having had the nutrients sucked out of it by the plants, can go on down towards the river and isn't going to have as much of an impact on water quality. And there's lots of questions around this. How well does it work? How many plants do you need? How long do the channels need to be? And that's what we're doing at the moment. We're working on all of those questions to try and answer what do we need to do to have enough plants, enough nature-based solutions to actually clean the water sufficiently that you can capture the nutrient, recycle it on the farm, and be confident that the water that's going to the river isn't going to have an impact. But I think one of the important things to remember is that when you're losing nutrient to a watercourse, you're losing a valuable asset. By capturing it and recycling it back into the farm business, it's a win-win solution for farming and for the environment. And it could actually make protecting water quality profitable, because you could have a situation where a farmer would grow enough comfrey that they could collect it, put it into cubes, ICB cubes, with water. It rots down. You can create a natural fertilizer that could be sold to horticultural businesses, garden centres, or even used on the farm itself. So there's lots of win-win benefits to this innovative project, and combining nature-based solutions with our traditional grey solutions to reduce the impact on water quality.
Great, thank you, Mark. I'll move over to Bronagh from a processor perspective.
Yeah, so I suppose if anybody isn't aware, Leprino are a milk processor, well, worldwide actually, US-based, but we have a plant here in Maherlin and another one in Wales. So I have the pleasure of dealing with both Northern Irish and Welsh farmers, and the individual set of challenges and opportunities each country provides as well. So I suppose for us as a dairy processor, and for any dairy processor, I think I can speak on behalf of others, nutrients are absolutely at the front of our mind for those in the industry at the moment. They were probably at the front of our mind prior to NAP anyway, but something that we just like to keep quiet about until we maybe learnt more. In my own opinion, for getting the badge in my chest, I think that nutrient management and policy around this is the biggest threat facing how we farm, and concurrently as well then, the biggest threat facing the very, very successful agri-food industry that we have in this country. It pays my mortgage, it pays my wages, it pays many other people's mortgages and wages too, so we need to look after that. So I suppose come back to Leprino then. As a result of our concern in this area, what we have done, we have directed some of our budget towards paying for a slurry additive for our farmers. It's called Slurry for Soil. They can have access to this for the next 2 years. They have had access over the last year, and they can order basically as much as they need to treat all of their slurry. So I'm not on commission for the product, but I will have to tell you a bit about it. So forgive the sales pitch here. But it is a slurry inoculant, like I said, called Slurry for Soil. But however, it's not so much what it does to the slurry. Traditionally, I suppose slurry additives have been about breaking up crust. This is using the slurry as a vessel in order to get to the soil and also the plant. So why have we went for this product, and why have we directed budget towards this? I suppose for some reason, soil health is not something that's often talked about alongside slurry. I think that would be fair to say when we're chatting about NAP, soil health was never really considered. The fact that nutrient availability dwindles massively below 6 and sort of 5.5 pH, we hadn't really talked about. We hadn't talked about the soil's microbiome and how it can accelerate nutrient uptake as well. And it was rarely mentioned, like I said, during any of the conversations around NAP as well. So soil feels like this forgotten family member. I know that seems really silly to say at a soil-based event, but I think we can agree that it probably doesn't get the clout actually that it deserves, and also the attention it does deserve in relation to nutrients as well. Obviously, we've had the soil nutrient health scheme, but we're sort of 3 years on from the first sampling was taken. I don't know, has there been any behaviour change? Has most of those envelopes sat on a bench in the kitchen table, where I have seen them on many a farm? So for our producers then, we took the focus back to Slurry through this product, Slurry for Soil. It contains 18 different plant bacteria and fungi. These are plant growth promoting, and therefore can help increase the uptake of nutrients in the soil. So, for example, we've done some trials with Dutchy College, and we've seen yields rise by up to 20%, dry matter increase, and also sugars as well. So how does this prevent slurry then getting into the watercourse? Hopefully using less and using it responsibly. If we can achieve the same yield or better yield using less slurry, it seems like a no-brainer. It's important to remember that slurry has a value in the likes of AD if the economics are right. There's a SOLS project. There's all sorts of things going on around recovering phosphate. So there is a mechanism for excess slurry. If we can get the soil health right to work for the slurry, to work for the plant, there will be plenty of excess nutrients that can be shipped up elsewhere or put in a more permanent form as well.
Excellent. Thank you, Bronagh. So we heard from the panelists in terms of 4 different approaches: science and research-led, Mark's work with the Rivers Trust, and Bronagh's work with the processor-led approaches. I'd just like to take a broader view, really, and think about the broader strategic context of agricultural transition, of food system change, of land use, and, as I mentioned at the top of the talk, the vectors of the issues that we see within our environment. What levers do you think we need to pull to really drive forward change in the sector and create momentum, really, and not necessarily regulatory levers, but other levers like behaviour change and encouraging practices and so on? Andrew?
I think farmers change their practice. Farmers do what they've always done because it's what their grandparents before them or generations before them did. So to get them to change, there has to be something that sort of motivates or encourages that change to happen. And that generally, I think, is either the processors, the people that are buying the produce, telling you what to do, or the government legislating you to do something that you have to do to meet regulations and continue receiving your subsidies and your payments. So for me, they're the 2 main drivers that encourage change on farm. So if you've got a government that's promoting growth, for example, that just wants you to produce more, this is going to be a problem, and slurry is going to continue being a problem because you're encouraged to have more cows, to produce more milk. That means more slurry. And although you can have more cows, you can't have more land to apply that slurry onto. So the 2 just don't fit. So I think it's the only change, and we've spoken a lot about solutions, and traditionally I don't like talking about solving a problem. I like to talk more about preventing it in the first instance, and I think that the regulation change or processors having a greater influence could be the easiest, simplest and most effective lever to pull to actually make lasting change that has a real difference and makes a real impact on this particular environment.
Thanks, Andy. Bronagh, you?
It seems like an absolute cop-out answer here, but 100% collaboration across, whether it be industry. We know we have farmers that want to do the right thing by water, whether or not they have a problem, they want to future-proof their business, they want to do it now. There's no funding to do so. We as a processor can step up and throw out a couple of £1,000 here and there, but perhaps it's not our responsibility either. I think with a lot of, maybe like a lot of policy, we're probably running before we can walk. With some of the ways that the SOLS project, for example, has been funded as well. Like I said, we need to get the basics right on farm first. We need to prevent the issue, and then we need to find a solution for any excess nutrients that there are as well. We have an extreme lack of agronomists, for example, in Northern Ireland, randomly. We grow a lot of grass. We don't seem to have many agronomists. So we don't have the people that have that nutrient planning and management background to be able to get out on farms and be able to look at fields, look at soil samples, and be able to best advise farmers too. So yeah, it's collaboration right from the farm, right from advisors, industry, the likes of the Rivers Trust, and I do really, the work you guys are doing is fantastic, and fortunately, there's never just enough money or resources to go around, but fair play to you anyway. So, yeah, like I say, cop-out answer, but let's collaborate.
Mark?
Yeah, well, if that's a cop-out answer, I'm joining you. I mean, I agree with what you've just said. I mean, our experience is that farmers want to do the right thing, not just for the environment, but because it's their business, it's their family home, it's the land that they've been handed on to, to look after, and they want to be able to make a profit in order to live and continue. And this all hinges on sustainability, not just environmental sustainability, but farm business sustainability. And those two things are intertwined. And just picking up on what you said, Bronagh, I don't think there are enough people available for landowners to turn to and ask for advice and support on what they can do to make a difference on their own farm, and discuss what's involved in doing that. We need to think about the time it's going to take, the resource it's going to take to make the changes on farms that are going to bring about that business and environmental sustainability. The one thing I would add is that where there are agri-environmental schemes, for example, and we've had various iterations of that here in Northern Ireland, they don't always work for the farmer. They can be restrictive in terms of what you can do and what you can't do on the farm. They maybe don't offer enough funding for the measures or the types of measures that need to be implemented to make a difference. There also isn't necessarily the help to have the right measures in the right places. I spoke earlier on about the buffer zones. Who can you turn to ask for help to design that, to place that on the farm? So we do need to have agri-environmental schemes that work for landowners, that support the business needs. And one of the things that we have done is kind of designed our own agri-environmental scheme that addresses some of those blockers that have prevented landowners from engaging in those schemes in the past. Things like allowing farmers to make multiple claims against the work that they've done to aid the cash flow on the farm, making sure that the grant money gets back to the farm business quickly once the work's done. And when we go and we see the fence is installed and the buffer strip is there, we're not measuring to the centimetre how deep the fence post has been driven into the ground and is it 2 centimetres too far apart. Because in the strict regime of the government-run agri-environmental schemes, farmers are constantly being penalised through those systems. They're trying to do the right thing. They're getting involved in the schemes that are made available, only to be told when they've done all the work that you're 0.5 centimetre out there, so you're not going to get your money back. I'm maybe exaggerating it slightly, but that is the feeling amongst the farming community. That's not going to work. What we need are supportive schemes that work with people, that recognise that we're all human beings and we're trying to do the right thing together. So when we talk about systems change, I think that's where I'm coming from, is having genuine advice and support and taking the fear out of the conversations that we're all having. And because at the end of the day, we do genuinely all want the same thing. We're maybe just coming from it from slightly different directions.
Thanks. Thanks, Mark. Marie?
We do a lot of dissemination work and have a whole range of different farmers come onto farm, because I think that's vital in designing potential solutions to go out onto farm. No two farms are exactly the same. They all have different requirements, different needs. Designing those solutions is far better than any legislative stick that could be applied. We want farmers to come and look at the technologies, tell us what's good. More importantly, tell us what's wrong or could be adapted or evolved in those technologies to fit each of their niche farming situations, but also to have the data to critically look at what is being generated to say, this is going to work, this isn't going to work. Where does this fit for me? And we want to build those business models and that value proposition with farmers. They're more than happy to comply with the environmental sustainability, but it has to be economically sustainable for them as well. And if we can give them the data and these technology solutions, I think many farmers will be more than happy to follow us along this path. But they need the solutions, and that, to me, is what's got to come forward far more.
Great, thanks, Marie. Before, I want to give plenty of time for you to ask questions in the audience, but before I do that, we've talked about not enough money being around in the system to support some of this change at the moment. Marie mentioned the regulatory stick there, which is where we've been in Wales. I'll go back to the top of what I discussed at the opening of the presentation, where we were given the opportunity in Wales to come forward with farmer-led voluntary measures. I suppose I'll ask a question to you. Not all of you. I'm sure Mark might have something to say on this, but do you think you're in a position in Northern Ireland where that sort of solution could evolve and come forward through collaboration?
You're looking at me now,
I'm
right?
looking at you, Mark. I am looking at you.
I actually, yes, I do. I do, yes. Because we're continuing to have those conversations. We all know there's been huge tension around the NAP, the Nitrates Action Programme. And there's a lot of really good and well-meaning people involved in all of those discussions. There's a lot of science goes into it, a lot of policy work goes into it. What there needs to be also is the input from the farming community about how this might actually work on the ground, what is practical. But those conversations are happening. And I'm encouraged by the fact that we can come to events like this and have these types of discussions. I think it's really important. So we have the opportunity now, and I think now is the moment. You know, if there was ever a moment, this is it, where we take a wise look at how we farm, what we want from our farming sector and industry, recognizing there's a whole history and heritage there to the farming environment, but also to the natural environment, and try to find those win-win solutions that I was talking about, highlighting the fact that everyone can benefit from a more sustainable environment and farming sector.
Thanks, Mark. And I'll just pull Bronagh into this for the last comment on it. I think that collaboration, Bronagh, you know, when we stepped into this in Wales, it wasn't just about farmers. We pulled the processes in. Slurry contractors came into the room with us as well as farmers. Do you think that's possible in Northern Ireland in terms of the processes coming together alongside farmers to support collaboration?
Yeah, no, I think 100%. And I mean, especially probably on this issue in particular, you know, your neighbour who's not a farmer, say 400 yards down the road, isn't really going to care what you do in your field until it hits the waterway that runs at the back of his garden. Waterways are very much a public concern, and therefore there should be as many parties come together in order to try and protect waterways as well, and in order to try and fund farming. Must look to the retailers. I spent a bit of time working over in England in the Rivers Usk and Wye area, like Jon was chatting about. There was private funding came forward for many schemes in that area. I don't really know why it hasn't been explored here yet to the extent it was over there as well. So, yeah, I think the right people are in the room. The right people are interested. It's just about pulling them all together.
Excellent. Thanks, Bronagh. Right. I'm going to open it up to questions from the floor. Can you please wait for the mic, which is roving round? So, any questions from the floor? We've got a quarter of an hour. There must be some questions in a session on Slurry. Lucy.
Thank you. Thank you all so much. And there's so much to unpack and so much you said. I've actually got a really specific technical question about comfrey, which is just confidence. And do you have any challenge around comfrey as an invasive plant? Do you have a specific variety that you recommend planting to avoid the spread of it into the farm environment? That's my...
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to give you a high-level answer because I'm sure there's lots of detail around it. So there is comfrey growing naturally in our environment, native comfrey, but there is this species here, which is Russian comfrey, and it is a rhizome growing plant. So it's not going to seed and spread seeds everywhere and spread all throughout the landscape. Now, I mentioned Alan earlier at the start of the project, at the start of the panel. Alan had worked with a neighbour farmer to his house and had planted a huge area of comfrey and then put a fence around it so that the cattle couldn't just walk in and out and eat all the comfrey to give it a chance to grow. I was in that field only a few months ago, and the grass was nearly the height of my knees. The comfrey was nearly the height of my shoulder on the other side of the fence, but there was no comfrey on the field side of the fence. It was all contained inside the fenced area where the comfrey had been planted. So from what I have seen, I don't see it spreading rampantly when you introduce it to a field. It grows in the place that you put it.
Well, that was native.
This is, yes, yeah. Yes. No, it was the Bocking 14 that was planted, and it didn't spread anywhere, yeah. But there's obviously more research needs to be done. We're constantly gathering that kind of anecdotal information from the trials that we're doing on farms, but we're also working alongside the likes of Dundalk Institute of Technology to look at what the uptake of nutrient is in the plant, for example. Does it actually take up other things? So if you're gathering dirty water from a farmyard, there might be chemicals in that, there could be medicines in that. Does that end up in the plant? And then what implication would that have for putting it back into your silage, for example? Those questions aren't answered yet, but they're ones that we're trying to answer.
Great, thanks. Any more questions? Show of hands.
That was a great presentation. Thanks very much. I was just wondering, in Harper Adams, that sounded like great solutions coming from there. I was just wondering, at farm level, how expensive technology for reducing the nutrients down and taking water out and all that stuff?
That's a very good question. We've got some research going on at the moment to try and ascertain exactly what that is. We are not commercial yet. We would like to hope by 2026 we'll have our first demonstrator farm. So we're running a list of farmers that want to be our first demonstrators, with the view that probably early 2027 it'll be a commercial product. We're looking at whether you purchase it, whether you lease it, or maybe if you're a contractor, you actually go around and process people's slurry tanks or lagoons for them. It is modular, and you might decide you just want to strip pea. You might want to go all the way to the water stage, but we're in the process of trying to develop those business models, but it being a cheaper technology to come some of the very big expensive technologies that are on farm, because farmers need that option. So sorry, I don't have a perfect answer, but most welcome to follow the project, and as soon as we have an answer to that, I'll let you know.
Andrew, see your project regarding separating the liquid from the solid. Obviously, there's a lot of talk around separating over here, and generally speaking, it's accepted that that liquid portion is high in, especially your nitrogen. Are we not potentially stripping away nitrogen from the system? Would that be fair, or have you anything that would indicate whether that's the case or not?
Yeah, that's a good point. And I think working with an agronomist, you can then utilize the liquid portion through the grazing platform, or even through arable crops as it is needed and required, and as it is appropriate to do so. The excess, and I think the issue with regards to slurry is an excess of it can be processed, and those nutrients, predominantly the nitrogen in the liquid portion, will actually be captured within the biomass of the crops that are being grown. So a number of farmers, for example, have a biomass boiler or heating sort of system. The willow, great for obviously firewood, but also we're looking at whether it could be fed as well. So we're looking to still utilize those nutrients And then the end water, grey water as we're calling it, is going to be put back onto the agricultural land during summer months when there's a lack of moisture, and a little bit extra is going to be sort of much appreciated. So we don't see there being a great loss of nitrogen from the system. It'll just be used in other ways, but predominantly it'll be kept within that farm and the farming enterprise.
Hi, thank you for the talk. I've just been to James Rebank's talk, conversation. One thing that concerns me, listening to you and having just listened to him, is that we're adding costs to the farmer, and already most farmers make losses, they don't make profits. So by adding costs, by getting them to separate their slurry and add these chemicals, aren't we actually just making the matters worse for the farmer? Aren't there other solutions perhaps that maybe we're not keeping the cows inside, we're keeping them outside and they spread their own slurry?
Yeah, unfortunately that isn't really a goer in this country, just with the way we are split up. But I do agree with you, there is easy wins, and like I mentioned about the soil health too, and I do think with some things we are running before we can walk. I'm not bashing farming here. I spend every day and every minute of my life thinking about farming. If I'm not farming, I love farming, but it is a fact that through the Soil Nutrient Health Scheme, at the time, this was about a year ago, I was told this, but at the time, over 80% of our soils were suboptimal pH. So let's correct that. It's very low cost. Lime has a return on investment that would make you throw money at it, if you believe all the salesmen. So let's do things that are cost beneficial. But there will come a time as well that we do need bigger technologies. Now, where the funding comes from, if it is the private sector for the likes to pay for Marie's product here, or to work with Andrew, it might need to come from somewhere to help us farm as we are within the next couple of decades. But yeah, I totally agree. There's easy wins. Let's get on with them.
Can I just say that I entirely agree. There's somebody talking in the one of the other tents at the moment, Nikki, that can tell you exactly how to graze cattle during the winter months. I'm not saying that's what everybody should do, and I appreciate Bronagh is absolutely right. You can't do that everywhere. Some soil types just do not allow it. But you could get rid of cubicles and move to a straw-based system really easily and eradicate slurry. Yes, okay, I appreciate there's some infrastructure cost there as well, but it requires a collective, joined-up sort of systems approach to achieve that. And the money to be able to do that has to come from somewhere. In the UK, we've looked at covering slurry stores, we've looked at acidifying, we've looked at biologicals. We've probably looked at every solution, and none of them have stuck because none of them quite do the job. I think we've got to look at more proactive and preventative measures, and removing slurry or trying to reduce slurry at source has to be one of those solutions that nobody wants to talk about, but I think we need to.
Just to add a little point to that, economic sustainability is vital. One of the wider areas we're trying to drive is if you could recover, say, that phosphorus product, you could sell it. And it would be really good to get the UK into a position where we have a circular economy for nutrient provision. We have enough phosphorus in our manures alone, without even looking at chicken muck and digestate, that we never need to import artificial fertilizer for phosphorus again in this country. If we look at a European scale, Europe doesn't ever need to import artificial phosphorus if we recovered it from our cattle and pig slurry alone. If we can develop that national and international circular nutrient supply chain, yes, there is a cost to this technology, but we would then bring new revenue streams into farms to try and offset some of that cost.
Great, thanks. At the back, and then I'll come to you at the front there.
Hi there, I'm Mark from RSPB. One of the talks earlier, they were talking about agri-environment schemes, and they were giving an example from England, and they were highlighting like the importance of the advisor. And it was, Bronagh, you'd mentioned there about, you know, the lack of agronomists and advisors and things like that here in Northern Ireland. And then Rivers Trust, Mark, there you were talking about, you know, the importance of your advisory work, working with the farmers on the ground, you know, just interested in the panel's thoughts and the importance of that. We know from all sorts of economic analysis that agricultural budgets are way too low for environmental land management. It's one of the things we campaign for, but I know and read some talk about things like, you know, a water levy on agri-food business to help pay for advisors here. Is there like is it government? Is it, you know, the industry, or is it a bit of both? Just keen to sort of draw that out a wee bit from the panel.
Okay, sorry, I'll go quickly, because I know Mark's very passionate about this one. But I think it is a bit of both. But you've hit the sorry, obviously doesn't want to speak to me about this subject, but yeah, no, you've hit the nail on the head there in terms of advice. Like I say, it's this is as much as anything, slurry and nutrients and waterways are a behavioural change problem or a behavioural change challenge. And you don't enact behavioural change by just sending a letter and letting it go at that. You need someone in between. You need people that farmers can look up to. You need to make examples out of people, and you need that fantastic advice in order to start that journey then as well. So totally agree, and I think it is both public, private, wherever they can get it, wherever it comes from, as long as it's good quality. I think there's an appetite.
Yeah, just to build on that. So the work that we have been doing as the Rivers Trust and Rivers Trusts has to date been funded by the department. Sorry, that's the Department of Agriculture, Environment and Rural Affairs here in Northern Ireland. And it has been funded through a group facilitation project where, you know, as an NGO, we are tasked with bringing together groups of farmers to learn from each other and to have advisors to go out on the ground and work with farmers directly. If we were to try and do that in every river catchment in Northern Ireland and have a situation where all farmers had access to a non-regulatory advisor, the government couldn't afford that alone. And that's where we need to bring in the industry, as Bronagh said, and different sources of funding to fund those advisors. But I just want to underline the point that it's the non-regulatory advisors that appear to be making the difference for farmers and for the environment on the ground. We were involved in a project over in the River Derg catchment. It was an European funded project led by Northern Ireland Water. It's a drinking water catchment, and there was a problem with the amount of herbicide that was coming down the river, so slightly different to what we're talking about here today. We had farm advisors out working with landowners who got to know those landowners, got to know the family, the farm business, what was happening on a day-to-day basis. We're able to provide advice and support, and we actually saw behavioural change because it was supported, because it was co-designed. That project ran out of funding. The farm advisors could no longer continue that, and some research, some follow-up research afterwards showed that a lot of those farmers had slipped back into the ways that they had been doing things previously. And we do believe it's because that relationship had disappeared. So the importance of having people, advisors, whatever we want to call them, to give that support to farmers, to be there at the end of the phone, or to be able to go and walk the farm and look at a particular challenge and come up with solutions is really, really important. And it also makes sure we have the right measures in the right places that can benefit the farm business as well as the environment. But we do need to think about how we're going to do that going into the future, and it's a partnership approach between the NGO sector, between the industry. And the final thing I'll say is, it's very, I suppose in a way, environmental groups like my own are seen sometimes as being the tree huggers. Sure, what do we know about farming and so on? We're employing people who come from farming families, who work on farms, who actually work with us during the day, going out advising farmers on how they can make small changes or big changes, and then go home and farm on their own farms. And that's what's needed. Farmers supporting farmers because they understand the situation, what needs to be done, and that every farm is different.
Great, thanks, Mark. I'm Bronagh. We'll take one last question from the front, and we're going to be done for time at that point.
Well, firstly, it's probably more a comment than a question, because some of my questions have been answered. But I think, for me, as a small farmer, but I'm coming from the south now with maybe a different regime, the person talking the most sense up there is Mark in the centre. And we talk about behavioural change, which feels to a farmer or sounds to a farmer like we're the problem. We made the problem. We didn't make the problem. And we might be following what our fathers and grandfathers did before us, but very few of our grandfathers had a slatted tank or had European breeds on Irish soil. Maybe it's not technology we need to be applying to the problem. Maybe it's just a nature-based approach, a bit of common sense. And it's like that woman who referred to James Rebank. You know, if I take a nice Maserati car and I drive it out that field, I'm going to get in bother. It's the same difference if I take big, heavy continental cattle and stick it on Irish soils, which really, we don't have the climate, we don't have the soils. We're going to go into problems, which led us to housing. And yes, fragmented land is a part of it, but we didn't house. When I grew up with cattle, we went to the bout, but they were suited to our climate. So that's really what I would be saying. I'm working on a project, about to start working on a project to deal with slurry, where we're taking a natural kind of biological approach to it. And the one thing that you really need to look at in all of this is that soil is the answer. Not chemicals, not new technologies, it's knowing and understanding your soil. Get that platform right, and the rest does itself. And it is that simple. I think we overcomplicate the hell out of everything. We just need to go back to simple things. And that doesn't mean backward steps, lads. Simple. And in terms of the processors and the government, as long as we keep driving a growth economy and that we have to feed the world, we don't have to feed the world. We have to feed ourselves first. And if we're not feeding ourselves first, we're not in a position to feed anyone else. And, you know, it's government, it's regulation, and it's the industry, because farming is not an industry. It's the industry who's riding on the backs of farmers that are driving all these bad decisions. So that's what I have to say.
I would ask the panel to comment on that, but look, we are absolutely out of time, so I won't revert to the panel. Thanks very much for coming to the session. Quite an emotive subject, I know. As I said, we've been through this in Wales in depth as well. But just a vote of thanks to you, and a vote of thanks to my excellent panelists for joining me on the stage. Enjoy the rest of Feels Good Groundswell. What am I talking about? Dear me.
We're not that good.
No. Enjoy the rest of the day. Thank you very much indeed for coming along.